want to ask Ann to tell a story about when your dad would come home from his being around the world and evangelizing.
I would love to tell this story, and it's going to be my introduction of your message, okay? Because when my dad, it was estimated that my daddy was gone about 60% of the time when I was growing up. So he was all the time going. But my mother made very little to do of his going. So I'd go off to school, I'd come back, where is Daddy? She'd just sort of shrug it off, and so we just didn't pay any attention to when he left. But when my daddy was coming home, my mother made a big deal of it. There's a big celebration, Daddy's coming home. One of the ways that we celebrate, and this is when I was a girl, the way he would come home, he'd come by train. This is before planes were really, that's how old I am, I guess. 65, remember, not 66, but... But anyway, and he would come by train from New York or Washington, and would come to our little town of Black Mountain. But before the train would pull into Black Mountain, it would have to go through Old Fort, which was a little town about 20 miles away, or maybe 15 miles away. And between Old Fort and Black Mountain is a winding road that goes up the mountain. And we live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and so you'd have this long winding road that goes from the foothills up into the mountains where Black Mountain was. So when my daddy was coming home on the train, my grandmother would pile us into the car, and she would race us down to Old Fort, and we would sit in her car in Old Fort, and so here came the train. So we would see the train go through the intersection, and then we would jump in the car, and she would race up the mountain, and so we would be at the train station in Black Mountain waiting for the train to come because we knew Daddy was coming. So we would stand there, and the train tracks in Black Mountain go straight, but then there's this big bend, and you can't see past the bend. So I could just remember as a little girl standing beside the train tracks, looking down the train tracks and waiting, and just how could it take that train so long to get up the mountain? And we knew it was coming because we'd seen it go through the intersection, but it just hadn't come yet. So we're waiting and we're looking, and then the arms would come down, across the road that crossed the railroad tracks, and the lights would start to flash, and then we would hear the engineer pulling the whistle on the train, and we'd hear the whistle of the train, and just then we'd see it come around the bend with a big headlight, and it'd pull up to the station, and my daddy would get off, and he'd come back. And I thought, I know Jesus is coming because I've seen him go through the intersection. I've seen him in the first coming, all right? He's come. He's died, he was buried, he was raised, he's ascended into heaven. We saw him come through the first intersection. Now we're standing at the train station, and we're looking down the tracks, and it's just so long. How could it take him so long to come back? But the neat thing is, and I've shared with you, some scripture that says he's coming, the signs that say he's coming, and what Ray is going to do, he's going to alert you to the signals. And the lights are flashing, and the engineer is pulling the whistle, and it's just getting ready to come around the bend. Jesus is coming. He is coming, and he's signaling us that it's soon. So